A lot of times when we look at the Bible and we hear different passages where like different parables that Jesus talks about are different things in the Bible, we start getting so familiar with it, we don't feel like we can learn anything new. And so one of these passages was like that for me was actually Matthew 11:28 through 30. This is a passage that I memorized, that I go to frequently over the years. Like I would go to this passage a lot, very, very frequently. Okay, so it was sometime last year, and there's a period about 6 months where the Lord started speaking to me about Matthew 11:28 through 30, not every day, but pretty often. Like almost periodically, all throughout the 6 months, he kept speaking to me about Matthew 11:28 through 30. So when he first started doing this, I was like, Matthew 11:28, I love that verse. Come unto me, all who are weak and weary and heavy laden, and I will give you. I love that verse, and I go to that verse all the time. Okay, so as the Lord started speaking to me, I was like, okay, that's great. And then when he would speak to me again, okay, that's good. I'll keep on entering Matthew 11. And then again, and then again, and then again. And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of a slow learner, but I think I'm not getting something because the Lord keeps talking to me about this passage. And so then I started asking the Lord more specifically, what is it about this passage that you want me to know? Because you keep speaking it to me and I don't think I'm getting it. Okay, so then the Lord started systematically speaking to me and saying, Sam, the reason you love this verse is because you love the invitation in verse 28, where it says, come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He said, you relate to this. When you're burnt out and you're tired, you feel stressed, you feel anxious, you love this invitation that Jesus is giving in verse 28. And I said, yes, Lord, I love this invitation. But then he said, but what I'm inviting you to in verse 29 and 30, you don't have any idea what that means. And I was like, but Lord, I've been memorizing this passage, quoting this passage, meditating this passage, literally hundreds of times throughout my years as a Christian. I don't know what this means. You don't know what I'm inviting you to. And so over the course of the next however many months, he started systematically taking me through Matthew 11:28 through 30. Okay, and I want to share with you just some of the insights the Lord has given me. Okay, so first he says, come unto me, all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Then he says the invitation is, take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Okay, so that's his invitation to all those that are really tired and burnt out. He says, take my yoke upon me and learn from me. Okay, so when you understand this passage, they're in an agricultural society. So if you familiar what a yoke is, if we can look at the next picture, a yoke is this. The yoke is that big wooden bar that they put on top of the oxen. Okay, so if you understand what a yoke means, the oxen, they don't wear the yoke all the time. They don't go around all the time wearing the yoke and feeding and wearing. They only wear the yoke one time. What time is that? When it's time to work. Right? That's the only time they wear the yoke is when it's time to work. So they can pull in unison together. That's the only time they wear it. And the Lord started pointing out to me, where I was pointing out, I was saying, that doesn't make any sense. Who is he talking to? He's talking to people who are tired of working. They're burnt out. They're weary. They're tired. They feel overwhelmed. They feel burdened. They feel a heavy weight on their shoulders. And then Jesus is inviting them to do what? Work. That doesn't make any sense. And then the Lord started pointing out to me. He said, yes, this doesn't make any sense to you because you don't understand what it means to rest. You think resting means no work. And I was like, yes, Lord, I think resting means no work. He said, obviously that's not true because Jesus' invitation in this passage is to work. And what is the result? Rest. He says, take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly heart, and then you will find rest for your souls. He's saying, Sam, there's something you don't understand about this passage. Because you think having rest means no work. He said, you don't understand what it really means to rest in the Lord. And then he said, you don't know what it means to work. You don't know what it really means to work. and having a work that produces rest. And I said, okay, Lord, teach me. Teach me. Okay? So the first thing he started showing me what this word yoke actually means. Okay, so obviously it is true. In the agricultural society, that would be the first imagery they would have, is they would have that picture of that yoke that sits on the oxen. But then the Lord took me to another passage. Okay, in 2 Corinthians 6:14. Let's take a look at that. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness?" Okay, so you might have heard this passage before. And when you've heard this passage before, usually pastors use this passage for what? Marriage. Wow, everybody knows that, okay? They talk about it in terms of marriage, even though this passage doesn't talk about marriage. If you look at the context of this passage, it has nothing to do with marriage, okay? But pastors use it in terms of marriage, and there's a reason why. Okay, look at what this passage says. Paul is saying, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers." Okay, he's not saying that we shouldn't have any kind of relationship with unbelievers. That's obvious. We need to be engaging with unbelievers. But he's saying this type of relationship you shouldn't have with unbelievers. Okay, so the word unequally yoked is a Greek word that's made up of two other Greek words, heteros and zugos. Okay, so heteros means different, like heterosexual, different sexes. It means different. Zugos means kind. Okay, this he's saying, don't have fellowship of a different kind. Okay, because if you have this, you cannot have this kind of relationship with an unbeliever because they are of different kind. He's not talking about they're not different kind and they're different species, but they're different kind in who they are internally. Spiritually, they're of a different kind. And you cannot have this deep, intimate relationship with someone who doesn't have that also. And that's why they use it in terms of marriage. When you have this deep, intimate relationship and fellowship together, you need to be together with the same kind, with the same heart, with the same spirit, with the same values, with the same intention. You need to be connected in that way. And so when Paul uses the word yoke here, how does he use it? It's intimacy. And it's not just intimacy, it's a deep, deep intimacy. This word that Paul uses here in 2 Corinthians 6:14, being yoked, is exactly the same word that Jesus uses in Matthew 11, verse 29, when he says, "Take my yoke upon you." When we look at this passage, is it an invitation to work? Yes, you will be working. But the primary invitation is actually for intimacy. The primary invitation that Jesus is giving here is to be intimately connected together with him. And if you think about that, we can look at that picture of the two oxen. You're going to look at it differently. If we look at that picture again, if we could bring that up, the picture of the two oxen that are yoked together, if one of them is Jesus, the other one is supposed to be you. You're supposed to be intimately side by side connected with Jesus. And if you think about the bar could seem like to be a heavy weight, which doesn't make sense if you're already tired. Why would Jesus say, "Come put this heavy bar on you"? That seems heavy to carry and restrictive to you. But Jesus is saying, that's not the purpose of the yoke. The purpose of the yoke is to keep you exactly where you want to be, which is right next to me. The purpose of the yoke is to keep you attached to me, abiding with me, close to me. The purpose of the yoke is to keep you exactly where you want to be. It's not restrictive. It's not a heavy weight. It's something that actually keeps you exactly where you want to be, where you need to be intimately connected, yoked together with Jesus. This yoke actually keeps you and guards you and protects this intimacy you have with God, to keep you close with him. This is the only way you're going to find rest in your work, is if you have intimacy with Jesus. If you're yoked together with Jesus, that's the only way you can have rest in your work. Fruitfulness comes from intimacy. You know, I have this ministry where I minister to pastors and missionaries. And can I tell you They are, and I could be one of them. I include myself, very, very like driven and focused. You know, they want to make a difference for the kingdom, and that's a good thing. They're constantly focusing on ministry and reaching people and teaching and preaching and doing all sorts of different things that are involved in the church. But when I meet with them, and most of the people that I meet with are like this people in Matthew 11:28. They're burnt out. They're worn out and tired. And I think a lot of you could relate to the same thing. Even though you're not in the role of a pastor or missionary, you could feel this way too. But I find like the number one thing that I see for those pastors and missionaries that I meet with, they don't have the intimacy with God. They make it about doing. And they're constantly doing and doing and doing and doing and doing. They're doing good things. So it doesn't hit their mind that they're doing something not right. And it's not that what they're doing is not right, but it's the power by what they're doing. And I think the same is true for us, isn't it? That the things that we could be doing are good things. You know, serving our families, serving our church, could be doing things in your workplace and wanting to be a good representative of who Jesus is in your workplace, wanting to be diligent, want to be responsible, want to carry those things out. But how are we doing it? It's interesting when I had a picture of this Matthew 11 and Jesus' invitation to put my yoke upon you. I don't know why, but in my mind's eye, I thought I had pictured myself with no yoke, and that Jesus' invitation is to put his yoke on me and be yoked together with him. And so the Lord started speaking to me about that, saying, Sam, is that true? Do you have no yoke on, and then you come and put Jesus' yoke on? And when I thought about it, I'm like, no, that's not true. I don't have no yoke on. Is that grammatically correct? I'm not that situation where I have no yoke. I actually do have a yoke. I have my own yoke where I'm doing the pulling. And then he took me to this passage in Galatians 5:1. Let's take a look at this. Now, this passage is interesting because Paul starts out and says, it's for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. Again, that word yoke is exactly the same word that Jesus uses in Matthew 11. It says, do not be yoked together with. When you look at this passage, this verse, the beginning of this verse actually is kind of like a no-brainer. Like, what are you talking about, Paul? It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Why else would he set us free unless it's for freedom, right? This is like a duh kind of thing, right? Why else would he set us free unless for freedom? But when you look at this passage more, it's actually very telling. He's saying the reason that Jesus came to the cross, the reason why he died was to set you free from sin, to set you free from bondage, to set you free from all the things that are burdening you, to set you free from all the things that are encumbering you and bringing you down and not giving you life. He came to set you free from all those things. But when we look at the second half of the verse, is that freedom is not automatic. And what I mean by that is, it's not automatic that you live in that freedom. Because what does he say after that? He says, it's for freedom that Christ set you free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to the yoke of slavery. That yoke of slavery is our own yoke. It's through our own trying. When we feel like, if you think about the yoke, what is the yoke? The yoke is when you have the oxen together and then you're supposed to do what? Pull. You're supposed to pull the load, right? But if you have your own yoke on, then who's doing all the pulling? And then Jesus was addressing this to me and saying, before you accept my invitation to put my yoke on you, you have to do what? You have to take your own yoke off. You have to take your own yoke. And so the Lord's answering this question is, what does it mean to take off your own yoke? What does that mean? What does that mean for you to take off your own yoke? Well, like I said, if we're going back to the agricultural example, right, with the oxen, and you have your own yoke, then who's doing all the pulling? Who's in charge? You're in charge. You're responsible. You're the one responsible for everything in your life. You're responsible for everything in your ministry. You're responsible for everything in your family. You're responsible for everything that happens with your kids. You're responsible for everything that happens in your marriage. You're responsible for everything that happens in your workplace. That's on you. You're responsible for all of those things. You need to carry that weight. You need to be responsible. And when we hear those things, it's hard for us because, is that true? In some sense, that's true. We are responsible. These are the things that the Lord has given us to steward. But it's how we're stewarding that's the important thing. When we think about this passage, we think about what it means to accept Jesus' invitation. He's saying, you can't accept my invitation to put my yoke on you while you still have your own yoke on. You have to take off your yoke, put it on the ground, and actually leave it there. Right? How many times have you taken off your yoke and surrendered all those things and then pick it back up? I've done that so many times. Lord, I want to lay down all my burdens. Lord, I want to lay down my kids. I want to lay down my life. And then the next minute, I put it back on again. And so I have to do it again and again and again and again. And I'm like, when does this actually stop? And the Lord was saying to me, you have to get comfortable enough to take it off and then leave it on the ground. At least long enough so you can put his yoke on. So when he was telling me this and asking me, and I was asking, Lord, well, what does it mean for me to take off my own yoke? And then he said just one word. It's control. You need to give up control. You need to give up control. You need to give up being in control. You need to be giving up control of what happens in your life. You need to give up control of what's happening in your relationships. You need to give up control with your children. You need to give up control in your ministry. You need to give up control in your finances. You need to give up control of your future. You need to give up control. And I was telling the Lord, that's not easy. That's hard. That's hard, Lord. How do we do that? You're telling me I can't even accept your invitation until I do this? This is a whole big step in itself. Before we even get to putting on his yoke, we have to do this. And the Lord said, the only way you're going to do this is if you change your mind of what I'm asking you to do.